Hi friends, welcome back to the channel. My name is Andrew. I'm a first year pre-med student studying in Perth, Western Australia, and I make weekly videos about student lifestyle and what it's like being on a sort of medical career orientated track. So subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and let's get into the video. So I know that the Year 12 trial exams, mock exams, whatever you call it in your state, are coming up very soon, and that means it's time to really refine those English essays and get them ready for those exams to a point where you're comfortable with them. I know that in New South Wales at least, English is crucial for your ATAR and Year 12 HSC marks because it's a compulsory subject and it will inevitably count towards your ATAR. However, most people fear English and just sort of hope for the best. Know that it's compulsory for good reason. The skills you learn in English are some of the most important skills you can take with you beyond your high school career, such as how to articulate your thoughts in a concise manner. So kick back, enjoy the video, and let's learn how to write the perfect English essay. Believe it or not, I actually enjoyed English. I was pretty good at it in terms of school assessments and ended up topping my school's English Advanced trial exam. This video will be particularly helpful for English Advanced students as I myself have been through it. My school actually didn't allow anyone to take a level below English Advanced, so I don't actually know the English standard course that well. But I have no doubt that the strategies I share today will be applicable to any high school English essay, whichever state you're from and whichever exam you're taking, whether it be the WACE exams, VCE, QCE, and the other exams across Australia. So I'll split this video into three main parts. Feel free to skip to the sections which you feel that you need most help in, but I strongly suggest that you stick around for the whole video in order to absorb the maximum amount of knowledge. So I like to think of essay writing as a pyramid. At the base you have the elements that cannot be left out. These are essentials, and what you build upon it adds more and more layers of sophistication each time. And that's when markers will start to say, and you'll hear them say, oh, this essay flows so well. I also want to talk a bit about exam strategy. Say, for example, what happens in the case where you get an unseen question in an exam and it catches you a bit off guard. Lastly, I'll go through some of my essays and essay plans and talk to you about how I use them in the exam. My number one rule for good essay writing is to keep things simple and concise. Too often we're caught up in trying to sound smart by using big words. However, it gets to a point where it simply destroys the whole meaning and purpose of the essay. Yes, I do believe that complex vocabulary can add that level of flair that you need to the essay. However, you have to be careful not to overdo it and forget about the core of the essay, which is your thesis and your arguments and your direction. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's move on to the thesis. So what is a thesis? Your thesis is the core of the essay. It's your bread and butter, the answer to your question, the scaffold that holds everything together. A thesis is a direct answer to the question. It's as simple as that. Stray too far from your thesis and the essay will fall apart. For example, this is just a relatively simple question that I thought of, so don't expect to get it in an exam. It's on Shakespeare's King Henry IV Part 1, the Module B text I studied last year. So let's unpack this question together. There are two components to this question: to what extent and whether the play portrays Howe as an ideal leader. A sample thesis would be, Shakespeare's King Henry IV Part 1 portrays Howe as an ideal leader to a significant extent. It's really that simple, don't overcomplicate it. This thesis answers both components of the question in a short and concise manner. My thesis will usually be the very first line of the essay or the last line of the introduction. The reason for these two positions is because these two spots will leave the biggest impact on the marker when they read the introduction. The introduction is exactly what it sounds like. It introduces your supporting arguments which help aim to address the thesis, which in turn answers the question. In a typical high school essay, you'll have three main arguments or three main points fitted into three main body paragraphs respectively. An introduction can be as simple as listing these three arguments so that you're making it clear to the marker what you're going to be saying throughout the essay, and that way they can be prepared and know what to expect. You've probably heard this before, but the introduction really does half determine the mark of your essay. After reading the introduction, the marker will estimate which mark level you're at. Think about it this way, the marker has over 100 essays to read, all on relatively the same material and most of which will have the same arguments or main points. In my case, they had 216 essays to read each time we had an assessment. The introduction is paramount for demonstrating to the marker you know how to articulate your thoughts in a concise and engaging manner. This level of engagement comes from a strong standing in response to the question, as well as an appreciation of the text. Now, English teachers love this. In other words, try and sound like this text has a profound impact on the way you see the world, but honestly, it would be better if you actually enjoyed reading the text. One trick I used in order to layer my introduction with flair and increase its level of engagement was to draw inspiration from the blurb. The blurb usually has a short, emotive, strong, passionate summary about the text, which is really good to get an idea of what other people think of the text and in turn demonstrate your passion and appreciation of the text. Moving on, we have the core of the essay, the body. Start off each body paragraph with a topic sentence, and as I mentioned before, these topic sentences are your arguments that support your thesis, which is in turn the response to the question. Really make that link between the points or arguments, your thesis, and the essay question. If your topic sentence is too long, trust me, it's perfectly okay to break it down into two shorter sentences. As I mentioned before, keep things simple and concise, and that's really one of the main ideas I want you to get out of this video. No one wants to read a topic sentence that occupies 12 lines on the exam booklet. Your marker doesn't want it, you probably don't want it, and yeah, it just leaves a mess for everyone. A good starting point is to use 3 quotes from the text which help you support your argument or topic sentence. You'll want to use a pretty standard template for essay writing, PEEL. P, so what is the point that you're trying to make which helps you support your argument or topic sentence? E for evidence, so basically a quote, and another E for effect, so what are the techniques used in that quote and what's its impact on the reader? And L for link, so how does this link to your argument and, as we mentioned before, the overarching thesis and response to the question? This is just a rough guide, so use those 3 quotes each with the PEEL scaffold. I also highly recommend using one macro technique in each of your body paragraphs. Macro techniques have structural implications, so they include things like characterization, setting, or in the case of Shakespeare, foreshadowing and stage directions such as monologues and dramatic asides. As you can tell, macro techniques sort of serve a broader purpose as opposed to micro techniques, which are your standard literary devices we've all come to know through studying English. I'll usually put the macro technique as my first bit of evidence and then move on to the other quotes, which are micro techniques. The reason for this is because, as with all things in life, you want to go from sort of general, more broader stuff to more specific stuff, and that way you'll get a sort of goal-orientated sense of direction in your essay. And I'll elaborate more on this in the flow section and how we achieve flow, which we all want to get in our essays. Ensure that with each of your points, make sure it relates to your argument you're trying to bring across. If it doesn't relate to your argument, then it won't help answer the question, which is the whole purpose of the essay. No matter how banger of a quote it may be, if it doesn't help answer the question, you can consider it pretty much useless. Now let's look at the concept of flow. Flow might seem unobtainable to you. You know, when you're reading your mate's essay and you say, gosh, this flows so well, how can I write like that? Well, the key is in essay planning. Flow is simply a product of good essay structure and direction, so planning will help you do that. Here's the essay planning scaffold I used in my essays last year. Here we have the quote number, which means which order the quote comes in the body paragraph. Here we have the technique, here we have the effect of the quote, and then this last one is the most important, the reason for this position. Now what I mean by that is, why did I put this quote first in the body paragraph, or why did I put this quote last in the body paragraph? And it's really important that you know that, because that will give you that sense of direction and goal-orientated sense of flow. A lot of students just slap together quotes in a body paragraph and hope for the best. It isn't a jigsaw puzzle, it's a pyramid. Remember how I mentioned that before. You start broadly at the base and work hard towards hitting that one final delivering blow to the marker. For example, quote number 1, your first piece of evidence for the body paragraph which helps support your argument might be a setup quote. It might be broad, it might be general, but then you build from that piece of evidence in your subsequent quotes, and then you work towards delivering one hard-hitting punch in your final piece of evidence. That's what markers respond to when they say this essay flows so well, because the student has a sense of direction and they know where they want to end up in the body paragraph. And trust me, that essay planning scaffold will help with that a lot. As you become more familiar with your text, as you should have by now, you'll always have little snippets of quotes and bits of the text in your memory. Try to incorporate these little quotes seamlessly into your sentence structures. This is something that I did, and I guess it just added a level of flair and gave the marker a sense I knew the text really well, which is what they want to see. Let's examine one of the essay plans I wrote up for the common module. I've added a few extra elements in addition to the essay planning scaffold that I shared with you earlier. They're pretty basic elements, but the general idea is that if you're going into an exam with an essay plan, you won't actually know the question, and hence you won't get a chance to bring in a thesis and your topic sentences. So that's why I have them now, because at the time of writing this plan, I knew the question I was writing the plan for. But in the case of an exam plan, you won't have that luxury. In this body paragraph, I really want to talk about, firstly, the detrimental impact of social repression, and also how that in turn leads to a complex struggle to overcome adversity. So basically in this paragraph, I want to end at a point where I show Winston's struggle to overcome adversity, and that's the sort of top of the pyramid that I'm aiming for. That's the last thing I want to leave the marker reading at the end of this paragraph. This first quote is a setup quote, as I mentioned before. This quote is quite long, so in the exam you won't actually have to write down all of it, but I feel like this quote shows the setting and dystopian world of 1984 really well, and so the stylistic feature and macro techniques say I can link to this quote is the fact that it shows the dystopian setting of the novel. So that's the reason for the position. It's a macro technique, it shows the setting of the novel and gives an idea of the environment that the main character is in. These next two quotes elaborate on that first one, building upon it, and really just highlighting, as I mentioned in my topic sentence, the detrimental impact of social repression. So here I'm moving on to more micro techniques. As you can see, my analysis in this case includes inversion and illusion. And the reason for this position is again, just building upon the setting of the novel. This third one is an important one because this is one of the more memorable quotes of 1984. And because I want to end up at a point where I'm showing Winston's struggle to overcome adversity, I want to really highlight how much of a struggle that is. This third quote is such a paradox that it highlights how much of a brick wall he's running into. And this paradox really just shows the complexity of the human experience, as mentioned in the question, which is always what we want to do, answer the question. That's the main goal of the essay. And as you can see here, I mentioned how it directly answers both the topic sentence and question. And so this last one, in hindsight, I think I could have picked a better quote, but nonetheless, it still shows everything I wanted to show. It highlights the power to face adversity. And yeah, that's the whole goal of my body paragraph. This is the top of the pyramid. This is where I want to end up, showing Winston's struggle and showing how he's trying to find the light in the darkness. And I'm using that through contrast, which is one of the main literary techniques that I'm going to be mentioning in this. So that was a basic rundown of one of my essay plans. Lastly, I just wanted to talk a little bit about exam strategy and preparation. Obviously, no one can predict what the exam question is going to be on the day. So what do you do leading up to the exam, and how do you best prepare for it? I know with the new New South Wales HSC English syllabus that it's a lot harder to bring in prepared pieces of writing such as essays and creatives into the exam and just sort of mold it. And you can't really do that anymore. And I honestly think if you're going into your exams with that mindset, you're not doing yourself any good. So what can you do? The key is adaptability and thinking quickly on your feet. It's not an easy skill to acquire, and it will need a bit of practice. I still recommend going into the exam with at least one essay which is in response to a very generic sort of question. For example, I can't really think of one now, but I'll leave it on the screen here, somewhere here. So go into the exam with at least one essay in response to a generic question, and then prepare using those essay planning scaffolds that I mentioned in order to set up multiple paragraphs and multiple ideas you can draw from. So if you have, say, in your prepared essay, you have 3 ideas, 3 main points, you can prepare 3 more points that don't have to be fully fledged out essays, because again, you don't know what the question is, you can just leave them as plans, and on the day, because you have that plan memorized and ingrained into your memory, it will be easy to flow through those points. I hope that makes sense. So in summary, you'll have one generic essay in response to a generic question. Then on the side, you'll have, let's say, an additional, 2 to 5 points, whatever you're comfortable with each point or argument having their own plan using the essay scaffold for their body paragraphs. Hope that makes sense. The key is always to answer the question, always be in service of the question. Do yourself a favor and be really careful of that point where you feel like just vomiting out your prepared essay, because that's going to be really dangerous. If you don't answer the question, then your essay will fall short no matter how many good quotes or points you make in the essay. So what do you do when the essay question they give you is very sort of jarring and you're not really comfortable with it? What I did when I found myself in these situations was to write out an essay plan, literally write out an essay plan, not just in my head, but put it down on paper so I can gather my thoughts and recollect it and give a sense to where I want to be in this essay. Trust me, the time you use here is not time wasted. It's time used to recollect your thoughts, and honestly, if you just jump into one of these questions which catch you quite off guard without recollecting your thoughts at all, you're honestly doing yourself a disservice, and you're going to be wasting time throughout the essay writing time that you have thinking about what to write next. And that's why a plan is the best thing to do in this scenario. It's important to note that all of these strategies about essay writing are all applicable to short answer responses as well, because if you think about it, short answers are like a mini essay. You'll have your topic sentence or your main argument, and your evidence supports that main argument, and you want to also have a sense of direction. So each subsequent piece of evidence, you want to be building towards something, and that's your flow. Now for the fun bit, let's analyze one of the essays I wrote up for the common module, and I studied 1984 by George Orwell. Alrighty, so I'm just gonna try and make this as short as possible, but still with enough detail to leave you ponder upon. So this is a question from the NESA sample paper, and as you know, my year was the first year to have the new English HSC syllabus, so we didn't really have any resources, so I just grabbed the sample paper question. And as you can tell, it's very broad and general. It's not really a question, it just sort of asks us to explore this statement. So what do I do in this scenario? Well, with my thesis, I'm just going to be saying, yes, throughout time and through the telling of and receiving of stories, we have become more aware of ourselves and our shared human experiences. That's my thesis. I'm agreeing with the statement, and that's my response to the question. So that's in my very first line, as you can see here. Okay, as we go further into my introduction, I mention a bit of context, and context is always good because you let the markers know you've done your research and you know what inspired the text. However, context is not necessary. Use it in order to enhance your argument. So for example, use the fact that Orwell's context was responding to post-World War II concerns, and that enhances the dystopian genre of the text. This is one of the main points. Because it's a story, stories are built upon characters, and obviously the main character is Winston Smith, so we want to hammer that point home, that it positions us to emotionally invest in the plight of Winston Smith. And then, as I mentioned before, we can sort of list the points that I'm going to be going through in my essay so that the marker is prepared and they're going to know what to expect. So these are the points: individual autonomy, truth, and human connection. Then I link back to the question, making a connection between stories and learning about the human experience. And that's my introduction done. And now I'm just going to move on to my first body paragraph. So I'm going to be exploring the value of truth and sort of identity in a way, because your identity is built upon memories. I hope that makes sense. And again, I'm linking this through the experiences of Winston. Now, remember that because the question is about stories, and the whole story is about the experience of Winston. So I always have to make that link between the experiences of Winston and what that says about the human experience, which is the importance of truth and the past. And then as I move on, I mention a macro technique, and this macro technique is a motif. And this is a recurring motif that comes up in the novel quite a bit, which is the mutability of the past. And that's my macro technique and evidence done. So I'm setting up the broad concept of the paragraph, which is the importance of truth. As I move on, I'm further highlighting the dystopian world that Winston lives in, and also introducing the identity Winston feels he has. Again, I'm mentioning how it's also a dystopian text, and so that also contributes to the storytelling element of the question. And I guess my end goal for this paragraph is showing how Winston is really trying to reclaim the necessities of human life, which are the privacy, love, and friendship. And how this story of him in an oppressive environment is taking that away from him. So this is my end goal. Obviously, the memory of a mother is a strong and emotive one, and I feel like that's a perfect place to end on. And so this is what I've been building towards. So in summary, this paragraph was about how there's been an alteration of truth in the world of 1984, and this causes Winston to question his identity. And this identity is what will enable him to have the privacy, love, and friendship. That's the sort of thought process I'm going through when I'm writing this essay. The end goal is to show how that strong emotive memory of the mother is so crucial in the human experience, and that's how I achieve flow. And as you can see, I'm just sprinkling in little quotes such as Ministry of Truth, human heritage, stuff like that, sprinkling in little quotes, and that all adds up to a more extensive knowledge of the text, or at least it gives a sense that you have an extensive knowledge of the text in a marker. Although I probably have 4 main quotes that I analyze in depth, I have these extra mini ones, and they all add up. Okay, furthermore, in this essay I actually wrote down 4 body paragraphs. In my HSC exams I always wrote 4 body paragraphs for my essays. I know I mentioned you can write 3 body paragraphs. I feel like I just wanted to set myself apart and show that I have a really deep knowledge of the text. Obviously quality is always over quantity, but you don't want to write too little. And if you do have the writing speed, this essay is 1.2k, and we had 40 minutes to write the essay, and I knew I could write that comfortably, so that's why I decided to go the 4 body paragraph route. Anyways, I hope this made English essays a bit more easier to digest. Let me know down in the comments below if you have any more questions regarding English essays and exam strategies for the Year 12 English exams, whichever state you're in, and I'll get back to you. Anyways, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace. Alright, if you got to the end of this video, this was a mammoth video, not only to watch, but to actually edit as well. Kudos to you if you got to the end of this video, because I did miss out on a couple of things. Obviously you can't neglect the conclusion, never neglect the conclusion. I know some people who just wrote 1 line for the conclusion and then called it quits, maybe because they were running out of time, but leave at least 2 to 3 lines for the conclusion just to summarize your points. I don't think I have to go into that in too much detail. Number 2, when I talked about the context, for the common module at least, context isn't that important, but for modules like Module A and Module B, when you study Shakespeare, context becomes more and more important, because context is what drives those texts. For example, in Module A, the whole module is about context. Don't forget about context in Module A and Module B. Lastly, I feel so stupid for leaving this out of the video, but always make sure to check the marking criteria. The marking criteria will tell you what you need to do in order to get those A boxes, B boxes, or whatever, those mark range. And also check those band 6 criteria, band 5 criteria to know what level you should be writing at. And just one last thing, it's always good to ask the teacher who's marking the assessment what she likes to hear. It's a bit strange going up to the teacher who doesn't teach you in class, but this is what people in my school used to do. We used to line up outside of the English staff room and just knock on the door, and there would be like a good handful of kids just waiting for the marker for the next assessment to come out, asking them, hey, what do you like? What do you want to hear? Stuff like that. And obviously they'll tell us to shoo and go away because they didn't want to deal with our BS. if you can get that information from the marker, that's always good. Anyways, peace.